Embroidery applique is pretty fun no matter which embroidery machine you own. But on the Viking Designer Epic, we do have where there's lots of built-in applique designs in this machine. And the easiest way to find them is actually to go to the Joy OS Advisor, and then on the Select Technique row here, find the one that says applique embroidery. Now with this is going to come up with a couple different kinds of applique, and when you pick it, watch this. This is the coolest part is, well, yes, the tutorial comes up, so depending on the last way you looked at it, it'll either pop up or pop up against the lower part of your screen, so if you just want to minimize it down here. These are all your step-by-step instructions, plus you usually find a handful of videos in with the tutorials. But up here, these designs are all the applique designs that are what are called covered edge that are in this machine. So at the beginning of your book, the sampler book, you will find that there are some symbols on this inside page that indicate different kinds of techniques like pop-up embroidery or cut work, or down here, which is applique. So if you see these symbols in with any of the designs, you will know that that is a applique design or a felting design or a cut work design. It's really nice that you can find, so like for this one here, this is a raw edge cut work, but it is not cut work, applique. So we have different ones throughout this book. So what I'm going to do is just minimize this. We're also going to show you how to move it to a position on your hoop and check around the corners and make sure that you're not going to stitch over something that you might already have on the fabric, or if it's near a pocket, that you're not going to stitch over the pocket area. So let's just go ahead and do this little flower. It's one that doesn't take very long, so we're going to move it in and then also tell the machine which hoop you are using. So once again, it's nice, your machine won't let you do a design in the wrong hoop. It's got a way to sense it. That bracket right here is what tells the machine which hoop this is, and if it's doesn't match, it tells you to put correct hoop on. So for right now, I'm really going to just leave it sitting. It's going to want to stitch right about here on the hoop, but that's okay. In the design positioning, we're going to move it to where we want it to be and make sure we get it far enough away from this design. So go ahead and touch go. Usually on this screen, for applique, I don't usually need to do anything. Maybe just spot if that hoop has been selected correctly, and then touch continue and let the embroidery arm come into position. We'll go ahead and attach the hoop, and then of course we need to move the design. So I live in the design positioning world down here, and what I can do is right now this is my needle. That plus is where my needle is hanging out. So without touching anything of these 4 steps, or even in the toolbox, which is how we can go corner to corner, you can just take the design right now with your finger and move it to a general area. So if you think you know where it wants to be, now you can go around and have the machine show you each of the corners. And actually, I've already done this once because I had this green piece of fabric and I wanted to actually see, was it big enough for this design? And so I quickly traveled around and realized it will barely fit. So that's what I'm going to use. If I'm looking for the center of that design, touch the little plus in the center, and then that way we can see again where that is on your screen. So again, without touching anything in the design positioning, you can move that left, right, or wherever you want to go. Once you have it set to where you want it to be, again, I might just check, make sure I didn't move it too far to the right. I'm good. Touch OK to confirm. Applique designs usually have a couple steps to help you position the fabric. The first one is always stitched just on the fabric as a location, so you know where to put the fabric. So you're never guessing where the design is going to stitch. And since I know this fabric is barely big enough, I'm going to make sure I have it positioned over this area. So this is going to just stitch out a little placement line. Traditionally, it's just done with a single one time around, and then it stops. Your directions will guide you to then place the fabric over the applique area. I also have the hot pink thread on because I want the final satin stitching to be hot pink, so I want to make sure that it blends in. On occasion, you know, sometimes you can use a color that's similar, but if you ever worry about it showing through, you might not want to use a black thread and then switch to like a white satin stitch. So the next time it goes around, it's really stitching the exact same outline, and you really can lay the fabric right up to it. You don't usually need to spray it or glue it. You can just lay it in there. Most of the time it's not going to move, but if you have any concern, you can go ahead and add a little bit of something sticky. Notice this time it goes around 2 times. That is pretty traditional in the applique world, that a designer will make it go twice around the design, and then it's going to stop. At this point, usually trim it out. So as it stops, but before I trim, I'm actually going to stitch the inside detail. And this is a little trick, because sometimes if you do the trimming right now, and then there's a lot of detail in the middle, which there is kind of this center part of the design, when it stitches that center part, it draws it even more. So if it's been cut right at the outline, a lot of times they'll say stitch the middle, then wait right before you do the outline or satin stitch to trim it. So I'm going to go ahead and do just that, I'm going to switch colors and then stitch out the middle of the design. The machine has stopped. It's ready for the last color, which, as you can see, is the satin stitch all around the flower. This is where you can use the trim position to move the hoop to you, so you could actually do the trimming in the hoop. Now, that can be used or found 2 places. The needle up, needle down button will move the needle. It looks like in the far corner, but what it's really doing is bringing the hoop to you, so you can take your scissors, usually curved scissors, and start to trim around that particular design, getting fairly close. Now, if you notice that the satin stitch is kind of on the heavier side, so if you're not totally right down to that stitching line, which you should be, but you definitely are going to get the coverage for it. Now, as you can see, I can kind of trim most of this right here at the hoop, but there's a point where it gets a little like I'm going to have to bend a few times. So I can also take the hoop off the machine. I'm going to just cut my bobbin thread because it's still attached, and continue cutting, but this time just putting it right down on the table and cutting so I can turn the hoop until it's completely all trimmed. Once I put this back on, then we can start the satin stitch of the last color. The design is trimmed, and now you can see why it's a good idea to, if the design has a lot of stitching in the middle, is to stitch that first, then trim right before the satin stitch. Again, usually your directions will guide you to do just that. I'm going to switch back to the pink thread, and we'll stitch out the final satin stitch. As you can see, we have 4 minutes left for this final color. And remember, if you have the MySew Monitor app for your phone, you could probably wander off and have it send you a text message to let you know when the design is finished. Applique designs are one of my favorite because I can turn any design into any color based on what fabric I apply. Plus, I don't have to wait for the whole entire middle to fill in and stitch out. So it's time saving and it looks great.